Hi, host Eric here, back with famous person Doak and famous person Mahagony, and we're talking libertarianism. Famous person Doak sounds like a anarcho-capitalist to me, and I'm
That's a good
curious.
guess.
I'm curious as to his position on what I would consider pragmatic limitations and/or requirements of that position, so to speak. I mean, where do you think what? How would you like to see actual policy going forward? Do you want to see the entire apparatus of government dismantled?
All right. Well, I lean towards anarcho-capitalism. While I am not one myself, in regards to society in general, state is a necessary evil, but I certainly minimizing its force as much as possible, as minimizing the amount of force it is able to wield. If anything, I guess I would identify um, just a constitutionalist and a nationalist. And in general, I believe that the government should go back inside its box from whence it came. So, in
Okay.
regards to policy going forward, I would start by giving free zones. Every time these things happen, just a gun-free zone. These shooters always go out of the way to go look for one. It's just like with Aurora, Colorado, where the shooter at the movie theater went out of his way to go to a movie theater where he knew guns were not allowed as theater policy. And it's the same thing with this night. It was in Florida, per Florida free zone. So and any accomplices he might have had as well, he just it was a target rich environment, as people say. And
So you see a gun-free zone as a um, defenseless people here sign.
yes, exactly. It's like the over self-righteous leftists, I should say, or regressionists is the popular term nowadays, who are the kind who just adamantly opposed to guns, that they virtue signal. The type of people who go to these fancy Hollywood parties and say, "Oh, well, my daughter were raped. I would be absolutely appalled if she would use a gun to defend herself." And these people don't really mean it, but they suffer from this pathological altruism where you have to virtue signal, you have to look, be considered good, and they just say things that are just so irrational.
Well, I would suspect
The,
that I suspect that there's a lot of type identification and and disidentification. Hi, Ben. Um, by which I mean people go, well, I don't identify with the people who normally favor guns. I see them as rednecks, as right wingers with an assortment of conservative positions that I dislike. I see them as people who are Bible thumpers and uh, who are fooled by corporations into politics that oppose their own interests. I think that's what people who oppose gun rights generally think of people who are in favor of gun rights as being. And so instead of really instead of really parsing out the issues in the way that we would normally like, people with certain types of people prefer to have our issues parsed out intellectually in this fashion. You know, they just sort of parse it out according to group membership. Thoughts?
I think when you bring identification into the mix, it really is interesting in regards to people's cognitive preferences. Some people are so human focused that they lose of. I guess what it does is it just blinds them to other things in regards to humanity. As there's a lot abstract thought in regards to that. They're just focused on immediate things. Just realize that most women are sensing and feeling, so that's something interesting to consider.
Well,
Um,
I think there's a unfortunate reality in which individuals assume solvency for government action. They assume it's actually going to solve the problem that they are trying to address. And number two, that they don't count the harms implicit in enforcing this legislation amongst the harms that are
Right.
that are there to be counted. So you've got things like anti-drug legislation is the perfect example where they don't count when they're doing their harms calculus the actual harms to people being arrested and stuff like that. They only count the harms of people experience from crime related to drugs, which they don't consider themselves responsible for, and from drug use itself, which is not actually impacted with your criminalization. So that's the problem with that sort of position. When you assume solvency and you don't count the actual harms, then things look rosy. Hi, Akira. Can I get anybody else on camera here? Anybody else got a camera and willing to be on camera? I've got this face covered up as much as I can with beard, but, Alright, well, I guess they got a lot of old host Eric's face here then. So, obviously, I think realistically, we can say that we're not going to end up with a country where we actually dismantle all of government. I think one area where I'd like to see us start is in the public schools. What's your position on that? Do you think we should get rid of public schools?
I certainly do think we should get rid of the Department of Education to start with. And in regards to public schools, there's a lot to go on there.
So you're talking, you want to say, let's talk federal first. Federal government has no business having anything to do with it, right?
Absolutely. 9th and 10th Amendments.
I agree with you there, 100%. The federal government has no business in public education whatsoever. But I don't think that the current public education system in general is working. But let's try to keep ourselves topical and stay on the federal level. All right, so do you think that we should repeal the 16th Amendment?
I'm trying to remember. That's the income tax, right?
I think so. I call it by the wrong number a lot of times, so.
Yeah, it is.
I think I stated all confident, like I'm pretty sure this time it was the 16th. I think I got it right. I think last time I said the 13th, which is like the end slavery amendment or something. Like, repeal that one! Repeal it! I meant the income tax one. But what would happen? What would happen? Oh my God. If the government didn't have income tax anymore, everything would fall apart, right? The whole world would end.
No, because we print money anyway.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what section it was of the Constitution where it explicitly prevents Congress from being able to levy a tax against people's money. So it's just there's just this poor, bittersweet, I don't want to say irony, but coincidence in that we have an amendment to the Constitution, and it completely conflicts with the Constitution.
Right. Well, I think that's why they had to make an amendment.
Yeah, and unfortunately at that point the Supreme Court stopped existing pretty much.
Yeah, I know. Well, okay. I think one of the best things we could possibly do for the country would be to, not all at once, but over the course of maybe 5-6 years, get rid of Social Security. We got to get rid of Social Security because we're taking a third of everyone's paycheck away from them every month. Can you imagine?
It's a gigantic Ponzi scheme.
Can you imagine if we inserted 33% more money into the economy all of a sudden?
Yeah, we'd have an economy.
Social Security is failing. Absolutely.
Hi, Hami. Hami? Hami? How do you prefer it said?
Hami.
Hami. We are currently talking the viability of actual libertarian ideals as public policy. What would be the actual consequences of them? What is your position on environmental stuff? Anybody? Doak, Hami? Anybody else want to chime in?
I agree with regulations on pollution, but I feel like looking through the information and researching global warming is a hoax.
think global warming's a hoax?
Yeah.
A hoax implies a lot of people in on it, on pretending something. Are you sure you want to go with hoax? You could just go with wrong. You know, hoax is a bolder claim to make than wrong.
I would say hoax because the political establishment is trying to push it really hard, like down our throats, basically.
Well, I mean, I think there is legitimately climate change. I mean,
Like,
climate
if you look
change.
at like for example, if you look at the ice caps, ice caps right now are recorded high right now.
Okay, well, the climate
There's
is
more ice than
changing.
ever been.
The climate is changing. If you look over the course of a couple hundred years, there's no doubt the climate is changing, and there's no doubt that
But
the
is it because
climate, that the Earth is getting warmer. But you could argue that it's not anthropogenic. That is, say that humans have nothing to do with it. You can make that argument. You can make the argument that it is anthropogenic, but there's nothing we can do about it, which is my position on it basically, and that it's absurd to try to fix something we don't understand well enough to even begin to fix. You could take the position that it's not even warming long term; that it's just part of a natural cycle. That's kind of a tough argument to make. I think a better argument to make is that carbon dioxide is probably nonlinear in its heating capacity.
It certainly seems that way.
No, and also if you actually look at the statistics, humans only contribute to I think like 0.8% of the carbon dioxide emission in the whole entire planet.
Well, I don't know, but I do know that there's a lot of carbon being pumped into the atmosphere compared to a non-industrial world, and that's sort of indisputable. Whether or not we ought to do something about it, or the notion of trying to restrict carbon emissions, there's no reason for a political establishment to be motivated to restrict carbon emissions in that fashion, except through the normal mechanism, which is individual idealism gone awry. Individual
No, and they
idealism that is executed not in the underneath the negative rights framework, I think. But I mean, I don't know. There may be money making interest there too. I don't know. What's your thinking on it? Why do you think it's so intentionally wrong?
no, because like if you look at the statistics and what they're actually saying, and also if you add on the solutions that they're offering, we'll be spending so much money, and the temperature would only go down by I think like 0.1 degrees Celsius, and it's just not worth it.
But what's in it for them to knowingly engage
No,
in these sort of practices, knowing that they're wrong?
like they're essentially, like for me, I think that their end goal essentially is to start taxing carbon emissions.
Okay, but I mean that would be consistent with them actually believing they're doing a good thing. The thing is, I think they do believe they're doing a good thing. I think that they're wrong in the sense that, primarily because one, we don't know enough. We don't know enough yet to know whether we're going to even make an impact, whether we need to make an impact, whether it's even linear in its progression. Number two, we don't want to. We can't cripple the economy in that fashion without massive authoritarianism. And I mean, I don't think people explicitly want it. I think it happens kind of as a natural phenomenon. I don't think people seek it, authoritarianism in general in the West, including our elected officials. I think they don't understand. I think they're idiots by and large. But I don't think they're intentionally oppressing people, really, usually. I would hope not. I mean, do you think so?
Yeah, it's like their own selfish like interests.
Yeah, I think it's a bunch of people with their own personal little pet wrong idea, thinking that it's okay to justify rights violations for their wrong idea. Like, well, normally it's not okay, but for my wrong idea, it's fine. I think that's the gist of it. A bunch of fucking people. What was the intention in taxing carbon emissions? Okay, well, there's a good question. Um, they were hoping to reduce carbon dioxide output, but look what happened where they actually did it was Australia, and where they actually tried to follow that thing. That's where they tried it, and it lasted a couple years, and it was a implementation nightmare, is what it was. And they repealed it a couple years later, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, don't repeal it," but most of the country was like, "Fuck that! That was so dumb." I mean, it's good intentions run awry.
You also say global warming is it could be a false explanation in the sense that like the world elite, like they want to basically reduce the human population.
Well, I don't really believe in a world elite is the problem with that argument, right? I don't think that there's a cabal of individuals who are making decisions like that. I think that rich and powerful people have conflicting interests with one another, and they pursue their own interests, and that's the way it works, in my opinion. What's Quigley Formula about, Doak?
So author G. Edward Griffin. Have you ever heard of the book called The Creature from Jekyll Island?
No.
Okay, so I would think that it is his most famous book. Now, take this with a grain of salt, as I have not read any of his books. I've only heard him speak about his books at different events and things of that nature. So, The Creature from Jekyll Island it goes into the creation behind the Federal Reserve System, and how that was just basically a group of elites who wanted to form a cartel and have monopoly over currency of the U.S. And the Quigley Formula is another book that refers to a man who was close to Bill Clinton, who Bill Clinton gave credit to and said if it wasn't for him, Clinton never would have become president. And Quigley is a historian, and he wrote this book, I don't remember the name of it. Griffin talks about it in his book. And this guy talks about how there's been a cabal that has been manipulating and causing, or better yet, orchestrating world events in order to influence the direction of humanity. And now Quigley praises them for it, and he's more or less their historian. He's been let in on the little scheme, according to Griffin. So I want to get around to reading Griffin's books. They sound interesting, especially learning about the creation of the Federal Reserve System, all that fun stuff. But yeah, so Quigley Formula is certainly at the top of that list as well. And I would say, just from my cynical nature, the idea of a cabal that has been orchestrating world events in order to rule humanity because they're addicted to power or whatever, it's just not surprising.
Well, but
whether
okay.
or not it's possible is a different discussion, though.
No, first of all, it's a matter of there's a presumption of a multi-generational component to it that I find implausible. Okay, so that's number one, where I would say it seems doubtful. Second of all, the reality is wealth is dispersed through lots of different power centers in the world, and those entities are often at odds with one another in demonstrable ways, monetary ways, where what benefits one harms the other. So it makes it challenging to imagine that they're putting aside all those short-term issues and simply prioritizing a long-term plan that keeps them in power, especially when them is necessarily got to be an amorphous group if they're really running the whole world with, it's got to be, them's got to include some Chinese people and some North Koreans and some yada yada yadas, right? Or you start going, well, there are some rogues, there are some people who don't go along with it. Well, then all of a sudden it's not really a very uniform monolithic elite anymore. So, I mean, I do understand that there are cabals that engage in conspiracies. I mean, for example, we have an organization that's designed exactly to do that in the United States called the CIA. Their job is to conspire. So, I mean, conspiracies occur. Nobody's disputing that. I'm just saying that I think that to assume that the world's progress is directed in that fashion is to give far too much credit to any single power base. Yeah.
Well, I certainly agree with that from a rational perspective. I find nothing wrong with what you've said.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the interesting thing about all this stuff is we do know that people do have the ability to conspire. We know that conspiracies have occurred, and yet we also understand that we're dealing with fundamentally a chaotic system of individual agents behaving according to their own moral agency. Hami, do you have anything you
Yeah.
want to add to this?
Yeah. Like I actually like read about the creation of the federal too, and like it was actually passed when Congress I think was on break or right before break, so they passed the bill basically without even reading it.
Which bill is this you're talking about? For the Federal
Back in
Reserve?
1913, when they created the Federal Reserve, I think they
Right.
were on Christmas break.
Well, I mean, a lot of shady shit went down around that time period. There's no doubt about that.
Good old progressivism.
Yeah. And then, the Great Depression justified all sorts of bad shit for all sorts of people. When I talked to my mom about Social Security, she'd say, "Well, you weren't around, Eric, when people were starving." To me,
Yeah, you
that's
didn't
not
get
a
to
very
see
good
people eating
answer,
the
but
trash.
Actually, look through history. Like the Federal in FDR actually was so long. The the Great Depression of President Doak.
can you repeat that?
If you had just let the markets fix itself, the country would have recovered much quickly
I mean,
and
I
much quicker.
agree. I agree. I think though there needs to be some sort of limits on in speculative investment where you're not actually investing the total amount of money, right? Where I'll invest. I want to buy this many, and I'll put down 10% of the actual cash. You got to actually buy the thing you're supposedly buying, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, this ties into corporate welfare, where like these major banks and investment companies, they can basically invest in risky stocks, and they'll get um not like loans, but they'll get money from the government if they lose money. Those are ways
Right.
of
Well, I mean,
risk.
and that's you see. Here's the thing about those kind of things. On the one hand, we look at it and we go, "Oh, well, this is garbage. Why would they blah 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 blah?" On the other hand, the public's clamoring for we need this get this economy moving, and they're trying. The government's trying to come up with private public sector deals in which supposedly they're going to pump a lot of money back into the economy. It's going to have these good impacts on the economy and stuff like that. The problem is it isn't those individual instances of wrongness are not indicative of some collusion necessarily, although probably there's collusion on the individual level in the sense that there's probably some lobbyists involved somewhere, right? But beyond that, it's just an example of what happens when we try to task government with something that's not supposed to do. It's not supposed to be managing the economy in that fashion.
The problem is like these things occur when the economy is actually stable.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Just like
if you tell the government to manage the shit, they're going to manage it. If they tell themselves that this is their job now, we're going to manage this, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to manage it, and they're going to do a fucked up job of it, of course. I don't know what to do about it.
yeah,
Are we really going to get rid of the?
interesting.
Go ahead.
The interesting thing, like the Federal Reserve is actually a private bank.
Right, I know, but what are we going to
Why?
do? Get rid of it? What are you going to replace it with?
I don't. Because it's like a national bank.
Bitcoin. Replace it with cryptocurrencies, as they call them. But
Yeah, but wouldn't the government lose control of the currency though?
right, I know. Well,
Bitcoin.
that's the thing. This is why cryptocurrencies scare the shit out of national governments. See, Doak calls himself a constitutionalist and a nationalist. I'm not. I think I am constitutionalist and a nationalist only insofar as that's the best way to solve the problem of excessive governance. I
I
think
concur.
I think that cryptocurrency adoption, if we all just adopted Darkcoin tomorrow, that would be the end of the federal government. It would be the end of all the governments. Who's going to pay
Yeah.
taxes when they don't have to?
And they can't like keep printing money either.
Right. Nobody's going to think it's worth anything. The only reason that people think it's worth something is because they're accustomed to spending it as such, you know. I've gotten in the habit of saying, like, I pay Justin sometimes. I pay all my coaches cash usually, and then I'll tell him, I'm sorry, Justin, all I have for you is this fiat currency. But he's like, oh, okay, that's good enough. I mean, what else are you going to do? Say, I demand gold and silver? Pay me only in Bitcoin? You could. You know, if you
Yeah, and
did.
also Bitcoin's the only way that we can go to because I don't think like governments can run on like run the currency through like silver and gold.
You don't think we can go back to the gold standard?
You need to find out them on the gold.
Doak, what do you think? Should we go back to the gold standard? But I don't see why that should matter. You just mean that just a teeny little sliver of gold is worth even more money. You know, just the price of gold skyrockets, but
I think returning to the gold standard is certainly a good place to start. A fun one for all the conspiracy guys is JFK and Executive Order 11110. That executive order stated that the U.S. Mint would return to having control over printing the U.S. currency, and the Federal Reserve can go kiss America's butt.
really, is that a real
Yep.
executive order?
Yep. And for the
Yeah,
conspiracy guys,
I think
anyway,
JFK was murdered by the CIA.
I think I have no idea. Maybe his brain just accidentally exploded. That happens sometimes. It's one of the it's a rare event, but it's been known to happen more frequently in Texas.
yeah, I think over there it's known as cerebral ventilation.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe
I mean, you
maybe
can also say that it's a rare example because they made an example out of JFK, so no other leader would ever try that again.
I certainly did make an example out of him. Um, I don't know, man. That trips me out. These kind of things trip me out. Obviously, somebody killed him.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt Lee Harvey Oswald pulled the trigger. He's a guy who wanted to defect to Cuba, and he basically declared that he would kill the president. So he's the perfect scapegoat in any sort of conspiracy theory for anyone, I would think.
Yeah, if you also look at his autopsy of JFK, he was like they say like the position that they say that people say that he was shot from is actually not the same position. He was actually shot from the front first. So, and they say Oswald was behind him, so there's no way that Oswald in that position could have shot him at that range.
Well, I mean, I think
Where the bomb entered.
it's fair to say we know that it's very fishy. I mean, I suspect that there's some sort of inside job aspect to it. It would seem to be the kind of situation that would almost demand it. Unfortunately, I also suspect we'll never get to know exactly what happened, you know? And it's unfortunate. What do you guys think about 9/11?
I think that was uh, a false flag.
Doak, what do you think?
I think there's a lot to say about 9/11. As someone who's skeptical, it's show me empirical evidence that the government did it. And even if the government did do it and it was an inside job, it was a false flag, so what? Our government has admitted to doing even worse things. So as far as I'm, I can't see how it's a big deal at this point in time, with everything that happened as a result of it.
I also think the U.S. government didn't have any direct involvement in it, but I think that they knew that it was going to happen.
So basically, we know that these Saudis and these other Muslims want to fly some planes because they've been getting flight lessons for a while, but we're not going to stop them. You mean something like that?
Yeah, because they needed a reason to go into the Middle East.
I mean, that's a sensible narrative, right? It's not a crazy narrative. The thing that I find curious about the whole 9/11 issue is the collapse of Building 7, which wasn't hit by a plane.
Yeah, I'm unaware of how the structure was designed for the World Trade Center, but my favorite skeptic in regards to these things is Bill Whittle. He has good arguments in regards to rebutting points of favor in regards to 9/11 being a conspiracy at any level. And
well, okay.
Yeah, I can't remember his argument, so
I'm sure. I am not making any bold claims about 9/11. All I'm saying is that on 9/11,
it is curious.
There's a third building that fell down, called Building 7. It was not hit by a plane. It fell down many hours after the first two buildings fell down. It, I think it's fair to say, received very little attention comparatively. And that there's yet to be any satisfactory explanation of why it fell down. They've come up with some explanations as to the two towers that were hit, that to me are convincing enough to make the issue muddied enough to unwarrant any claims of something fishy going on. Which is to say, there's not enough there to justify exerting energy thinking things are fishy. But with Building 7, to me, there's a failure to account for it falling down. That's kind of a big problem.
And even the two main buildings that fell, like if you look at it through the lens of physics, there's no way that the building structure should have like free fall.
Okay, but that's enough in dispute. What I'm saying, I may agree or disagree with you or not. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's enough in dispute, and I've heard enough explanations as to how it possibly could have fallen down despite this, and I've looked into it enough that I'm not willing to say that it's not an area where I personally am going to say, here's a problem, right? Because that's too much of a muddy pool. The point I'm going to point to is here's a problem, and there's no mud at all, is why did that building fall down? Forget those other buildings, that's muddy. Why did that one fall down? There isn't even an explanation. There's none.
An interesting thing too is Bush's brother was actually the head of the security team of the towers, like all 7 of them, and his company just happened to leave the day before 9/11.
Well, there are a lot of stuff like that is also potentially convincing if you're going to be convinced by stuff like that. I'm one who likes to really narrow his arguments down to a single point and hammer it, one where they're weakest, which is to say, coincidences can be coincidences, but buildings don't fall down for no reason. You haven't come up with a single reason yet why this building has fallen down, and it's this many years later, and you can expect us to believe your explanation about the whole thing, but you can't tell us why this building fell down. And you can't come up with even a pretend explanation, because it would fall apart at the slightest breeze. Explain to me why it fell down. Just narrow the point of attack, right? That's the
Yeah.
key. That's the key, in my opinion, to winning any argument like this. I'm not making any claims. Answer this fucking question. Why did that building fall down? No plane hit it.
Wait, that was the hotel, right?
Building 7. I don't know what it was. I've heard various things about what was inside of it. To me, it's irrelevant. Why did it fall down? If you can't answer that question, why should I believe you about any of your other explanations? Yeah, it was another complex of the Trade Center towers. It was like a building between it and the two ones that were hit. Debris hit it. Uh-huh. That made it fall down. Well, I mean, I just don't buy it. Does anybody else buy it? Debris hit it so it fell down. The whole building collapsed because debris hit it.
That's BS.
I mean, that's not how buildings work, right? It's just not how they work. That's not believable. Burning debris, but not jet fuel burning. Some burning debris hit it, and the whole building collapsed. The whole building was never aflame. It wasn't like a conflagration, right? We saw a video of it. When it collapsed, there appeared to be a fire that was by a window on like the 7th floor or something, and that was it. And then the whole building collapsed. I mean, I call bullshit.
You know, the funny thing too is like whenever you watch a 9/11 documentary, they never talk about that building. Ever.
Well, and it's the only thing that matters. It's the only point that matters. Everybody wants to talk about anything else that's muddy. Answer that fucking question. Why did that building fall down? Burning debris hit it. My ass. Look at the fucking video. The building, fine, and then all of a sudden it falls down. The whole thing. Why? It wasn't a flame. There was one fire you could see on the video. It's on like the middle floor somewhere. In the middle floor somewhere. And it's like conveniently placed right by the window. Like, you can tell it's isolated. And then the whole building collapses. Really? That's the best you could do?
It was the lizards in the basement.
What's that?
I said, it was the lizards in the basement.
Yeah, lizards in the basement. Well, look, that's the thing. I don't want to. It's easy to be dismissive, right? Like, this is one of the ways in which propaganda can be made effective. If I'm a disinformation person, I don't directly counter any of the good points, right? I just put out a bunch of fucking nonsense theories that aren't right, but that have some sort of glimmer of truth to them, right? I flood the marketplace with bad ideas, bad reasons as to why the truth is true, right? So it's like, if you throw a whole bunch of shitty arguments in the marketplace in defense of a true idea, that true idea becomes befouled by the shitty ideas supporting it. That's why I don't play those kind of games, right? I limit it to the single question that matters. Why did that building fall down? You're going to have to give me something more than fucking burning debris hit it. Burning debris hit all the buildings around there. Why did that one fall down? Nobody can answer that question. So, nobody even tries to answer that question.
Like I said, I don't know enough, so I'm not going to try.
Right.
I do think your skepticism is reasonable, though. There's nothing wrong in your reasoning.
Right. So, anyway, that's my take on that. I used to be, a long time ago, back when 9/11 actually happened. I don't know how old you guys are, but I was, I don't know, 27 maybe?
I turned 10 the week before.
Well, I was a little older than you.
Yeah.
Was anybody working, like, have a job already in a family when it happened besides me?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I can tell you, when it first happened, I was quite obsessed with this 9/11 conspiracy stuff, and I researched the shit out of it. But I found the edges, so to speak. Like, oh, here's here's where here's where you're not going to get anywhere, and here's where you will get someplace. And so, at that point, I sort of stopped worrying about it. You're not going to ever get anywhere with it in general, because to get somewhere with it would imply that there's evidence to be had and there's truth to be found. But whatever happened is lost in the fucking disinformation of history. It's frustrating, though. Other thoughts before we call this an episode? Fairly wide-ranging topics there. Yeah. Okay, well, I think we covered terrorism / false flag operations, conspiracies in general, 9/11. What was the other conspiracy we talked about? Oh, like
That's the federal.
Federal Reserve conspiracy, right? Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's to say that's a conspiracy is not stretching the definition of the word much, right? It kind of is.
Oh.
Somebody has a thought? Okay. So anyway, libertarianism in general and other stuff was talked about. Thanks for watching Talking to the Fence People. I've been host Doak. Fence People Doak, Eccentric Amp, Hami, Mahagony, and Ben have been in attendance.